It's chilly, but not that chilly. Right. So comfortable in the chair, as always. Rubbing your hands together, just to get the circulation going in your fingers, and then gently over your face. Up over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. The other side. And then the upper part of your chest. Down to your belly. And finally your legs. Sit back. Feel your weight dropping back, and just try and make a deliberate decision, have a deliberate intent to settle in to your body, let your attention settle in to your body, and just to sort of draw back a little bit from everything else that's going on around you. Not blocking things out, they will sort of like surface quite a lot, but just in the sense that you've got something to come back to, this sense of space, being rooted, whatever, however you sort of understand these things, however you experience these things. One image I quite like is that when we do this, it's like walking through a wood and suddenly coming into a clearing. And from the clearing, you can see back into the wood, but you can see more clearly in a way because there's not quite so many trees crowding you around. So you're still in the wood, things are still going on around you, but you're not quite so caught up in them. The weight sinking into the chair, your breathing settling, some of the tightness and stiffness in your body beginning to dissolve away. Your thoughts settling like mud in a jar of water, so a jar of muddy water, with the mud just slowly settling to the bottom. And this is a feeling we want to try and just have in the back of our attention as we change position. You bring your feet in, and this seems to naturally draw you forwards. So again, going through the process of checking your posture. Checking your breathing. Bring that 2/3 of your weight back in your hips. About 1/3 in your feet. Feeling that the upper body has the support of the lower part of your body as well as of the chair, which again contributes to that sense of coming into the clearing in the wood, that sense of space, because it's hard to feel that when you're sitting there sort of strained in your shoulders or your neck or your back. So whichever of these ideas, whichever of these images work for you are the ones to try and retain. If something doesn't work for you as an image, don't chase after it. remember it because it might make sense at some point, but they're all just ideas, images to remind us of the sort of core experience. So you may come up with your own images, your own ideas that will work better for you. And now just slowly turning your head. Observing the movement. Not just in your neck and your shoulders, but maybe aware of a little bit of a change down either side of your spine. Parts of your body extending, other parts of your body contracting. Those areas of your body extending, think of them like elastic bands or some kind of elasticated material that just reach a point where they quite naturally start to contract. So a movement in one direction will automatically lead to the opposite movement. And now your shoulders. And then going forwards. And then hands out to your sides. So your hands are sliding around pillars either side of you. And then winding around. Back the other way. It's just a slow, gentle sort of journey, exploration of this spaciousness within your body. It's almost like having come to the clearing in the woods, you're just having a little wander around, seeing what's there. Resting your hands, easing forwards and pushing down. One of the phrases in the Tai Chi classics, so-called, this body of writing that's developed through the centuries, simply says that we should seek the stillness within the movement. And I think this is one of those things that maybe distinguishes Tai Chi from other exercises. It gives it this, if you like, meditational aspect as well. Not just about what we can do physically, but the way that the whole of ourselves, body and mind, engages in practice. Turn slightly. Your attention will get drawn out. You'll suddenly remember what it is you've got to do this afternoon, or what you didn't do this morning, or what you heard on the radio this morning, or just all sorts of things bob up, if you like, like corks bobbing up in water. And then turn the other way. But just, as always, bring your attention back to the movement and notice that actually, in a way, this loss of focus, of attention is actually accounted for. It's built into the system because the movements themselves extend out and come back. So there's always space, there's always a part of the movement, a part of the process that comes back to this central feeling, and then going around. And this is the sort of dialogue, the rhythm that builds between two broad elements, expansion and contraction, or pushing out and drawing back, however you think about it. Yin yang is the sort of generic Chinese term for this process, and it's a dynamic thing. Yin changes to yang, changes to yin, changes to yang. You throw something up in the air, it comes back down again. It hits the ground, it bounces up, and so on and so forth. Change direction is a circle. So this idea that we can be in the clearing and then suddenly find ourselves in the woods, but then come back to the clearing, is actually very much built in to the system. And then down in the middle, stepping out. And that, of course, in a way distinguishes it from other meditational arts, that there is this element of Tai Chi and Qigong that is very much in our lives, in everyday life. It gives it a very practical edge, I think. And then on the other side, so just as the sort of aspect of mind, the meditational element in the practice distinguishes Tai Chi from other forms of exercise, so the physical element, the exercise element, kind of distinguishes Tai Chi from other meditational arts. It gives it a fairly unique position. And there are other things, yoga can do that as well, of course. But then come back. Okay, so letting your hands drop down, just rotate your hands out a little bit, and then easing forwards. And just feeling the opening and closing, expansion and contraction in your chest and your upper back. Very much part of the movement, part of what moves your arms. Those the big muscles of your back, the trapezius muscle across your shoulders, and the front, the pectoral muscles, the muscles of the ribs. So now as you change to fisherman cast and neck, the muscle's still very much working. As I go forwards, my arms are lagging behind a little bit, so there's an expansion in my chest. And then as I go back, once again, my arms are slightly delayed, so there's an opening and then a contraction in my back. Remember that experience of, say, turning your head and feeling one part of the body expand and then get to a point where it quite naturally contracts. So one of the things we want to look for as we go through these movements, especially the simpler movements, the ones we're more familiar with, is that point of change. We want the parts of the body that are extending to extend as far as they can without actually beginning to stiffen up. So for instance, as I go forward, I can feel my back extending, I can get to there and it's still fine. I get to there and suddenly I'm tightening. So here is where I just allow myself to go back. I don't want to get into a fight with my back or any part of the body. As a consequence, we generally feel that we could have moved a little bit further in Tai Chi just by pushing a bit harder. But the aim is to produce this harmonious quality in body and mind, not one where we feel that we're fighting against our own body. Now, coming over, so the balls underneath your arms. If this is something we can establish as a way of working, as a kind of characteristic of Tai Chi, then when we get to some of the trickier movements, especially some of the standing movements, we have a kind of idea and experience of the quality that we're looking for all the way through. It doesn't guarantee we're going to be able to produce it all the time. But it does mean at least we know what we're aiming for. And then this time, you're on your arms apart. And then, excuse me, pressing forwards. And with still that gentle shift of your weight forwards and backwards. And just spare a moment to feel what's happening in your feet. You get to a point where your feet and your legs feel quite full up. And that's really as far as you can go. Again, not straining against that, but this sense that there's a dropping downwards through your feet. And then similarly, as you go back, your hips and lower back. So if you've lost the sense of being rooted in the transition from front to back and back to front, which is quite normal, by the way, any kind of change can threaten that, then there is a moment or two in between each weight change to just, again, settle your weight. So again, we get into the habit of just taking that little time out, just for a moment or a split second, rather than sort of dashing from one point to another. And then the hands twisted. So that stillness within the movement that we look for. It's a very practical element, apart from being a good kind of stress reliever and good to the mind, really. It's also just a moment when we can sort of find our route again, find our posture, our stability before we move again. And it's very easy to lose that, to get rushed, panicked almost into, got to go forwards, got to go back, got to go forwards, got to go back. But that little bit of space is really one of the great gifts of Tai Chi for all sorts of reasons. And then go back to pigeon spreads its wings, sequence of 3. One more round of this. And then changing. This time, as you bring your hands back, switching from movements where it's more horizontal to more vertical movements. Doing the expansion and contraction. Imagine it as a ball here in the area between your hips and your waist. And the ball expands and contracts. When a ball expands, it's round, so it actually expands in all directions. And significantly for this movement, as we call it rooting down, it means that as well as the push upwards, this sense of an expansion up to our belly, our chest, moving our arms, there is at the same time the counter movement, the gentle push down through our hips, feet and legs. So at the same time as you're expanding, you're also reaffirming this rooted quality. Like when a plant grows, it grows in 2 directions. It grows upwards, but the roots grow downwards. Well, sort of. I know that's not a strict botanical description, but you get the idea. One more time. And then the wild goose. So one way or another, that downward movement that counter movement is always present in all the movements. We noticed it when we're going forwards and backwards. There's a downward movement just before in the hip before we go forwards, a downward movement in the feet before we go back. We notice it here. So there's always a counterbalancing movement, and ultimately that counterbalancing movement will always go down into the ground. It may go back or forwards a little bit as well, but its ultimate destination is going to be down. So I'm changing. So again, this is a good habit to get into because it means that finding our root and the stability that comes with that just becomes a natural part of how we move. It becomes hardwired into our system. And I think this is one of the things that really does lead to Tai Chi's reputation as being very good for balance and stability. And so that is very much connected with that quieter, spacious, still quality that I started off talking about. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One more time. And then change. Then add in the turn. And the turn is in your hips, very gentle. One more round. And then look out, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. This sort of combines both the horizontal movement, because your head and your shoulders and your arms are going forwards. Even your weight's not moving forwards a great deal. It's a little bit of movement into this thing. But also, as you go forwards and backwards, you're also going sort of down and up. So internally, it's a little bit more complicated than previous movements. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Good. And then the other side. Good, and then grasping the tiger's ears. A few years ago, I did a training day with a woman called Martine Batchelor, who's a meditation teacher. She's very well known. She has an international reputation. She was in Cambridge, and she mentioned that she lives in France, in rural France. She'd been asked to get involved with a European-wide study of meditation techniques for older people, and there was a study going on and results monitoring. So some bunch of people in rural France really drew the long straw, because they got to be involved in this project with Martine teaching them. She's an amazing teacher. But she was saying what was interesting was how she was surprised how much people reported back after the first session. And I spoke to her about this afterwards, because I was quite interested in what was going on. And she was saying people reported all sorts of things, that they were sleeping better, moving better, they felt more stable, less pain, just all sorts of things. She said, it was just after one meditation session. I've noticed the same thing in Tai Chi, that often people will come back after their first session and say, oh, it's amazing, I felt like this, this, and this. And of course, if it was purely physical, there's always going to be a kind of like, you know, when you do something new, there's always going to be a little kind of boost. It will plateau out. But if it was a purely physical thing, our bodies don't change that much that quickly. And you know, it's the same with everything, really. Nothing is purely physical or purely of the mind. When we encounter something new, something can shift, not just physically, but in this sort of area that we refer to as the mind as well. And it shows the importance of both elements, I think, of Tai Chi. The fact that we work in this area where mind and body overlap. It's not mind over matter or the other way around. It's not subsuming the body or forcing the body. It's just recognizing that there is this, what you might think of as a central space that we actually work from. Now, place your hands in front of your shoulders again. We're going to go into bear play, but we'll build it up and just similar to the movement we did at the beginning, but alternating from side to side. That same kind of rolling movement. You can feel what's happening in your upper back, ribs, as well as in your shoulders. Notice that I'm turning a little bit. I'm going to move the weight, so as my elbow goes down, I settle into that side. And that's nice and smooth. I'm doing this quite big so you can see what's going on. Try and use your feet and your hips a bit. So when you're here, push down through your foot and your hip so that you're pushed across to the other side and then on the side. So you take that moment to sink into your hip, to sink into your foot. And it's like dropping down on a trampoline, or if you're on a very springy chair, you would find yourself being pushed back up. So still retaining some of that awareness of the stillness within the movement. And then release your arms and your hands, going into the exercise, bear play, so the hand comes down like the bear's paw. Some lovely sort of rolling, fluid movement through the body. Quite a strong, but also quite a soft image. One that is very much, I think, the image of the bear gives you this sense of something that is just naturally quite sort of grounded, quite rooted. And yet at the same time, your movement's not restricted, a lovely kind of fluid movement, particularly in your back and your spine. Very good for the back. So it's like somebody's just very gently massaging the back for you. Just make sure you don't overdo the movement. As I say, I am exaggerating the movement. Work from the feeling of movement in your back and your weight outwards rather than the other way around. Bear play. And then one more time. And once again, just let your hands rest. Then again, rubbing your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. onto one shoulder, your arm. And the other side. Onto your chest. And your belly. Finally, your legs. Lovely. And then stand. So again, we have an idea of what we're looking for. We have a sense, you know, if I talk about the space, the route, the clearing in the forest or whatever, we have some kind of sense of how that can feel. It's a bit more challenging, obviously, when we're standing, especially if you feel a bit unstable. But we really do want to try and find that feeling. So, you know, this is where having the chair next to you for a little bit of support, or standing behind it, or whatever, is actually a very important thing to try and do. I put mine to the side. It's quite interesting to do that, but if I'm trying to teach and I'm turning around, it's always a bit inconvenient. You don't have that inconvenience. So we want to think about the alignment of the body again, and then so just rocking gently forwards and backwards from the ball of your foot to your toes, looking to find that place where you're more in line with the pull of gravity. It's hard to feel settled in your mind if you don't feel comfortable and settled in your body, and vice versa. You know, imagine going to see a film or going to the theatre or something like that, and finding when you got there that your chair was uncomfortable. And somebody said to you afterwards, well, what was the film like? You'll probably say, it was okay, but I couldn't quite get comfortable. It would affect how you responded to whatever was going on. Likewise, if you had something on your mind and you kept thinking about it, say, it seemed like a good film, but I couldn't really concentrate on it. So, you know, these things very much work together. So looking for that point where there's an equilibrium between front and back. If I go a long way forward, then I will get pulled forward. So if I go a long way back, I'll get pulled back, which means that in theory, there is that point somewhere in the middle where we're more settled. Not necessarily the same place all the time, but you know what you're looking for. You've got a kind of feel for it. So just coming to rest, letting your hips drop back and then down a little bit more. Push up. So here we very much see the opposite movement that I was talking about in the chair. I'm here and it's like I'm pushing my feet into the floor, almost like I'm going to jump up. So I have to push down in order to get the expansion upwards. So the rooting down isn't just something we look for stability, but is, in a sense, where the movement starts from. And we'll see the same thing when we come to the weight changing exercises as well. So again, this is a process that we want to really hardwire into our mind, into our body, into our nervous system. And then wild goose. So remember that, you know, that the map of your brain and the nervous system is not a fixed thing. It changes according to how you use it. It's plastic. So if you focus on things like cultivating that space of stillness, cultivating those opposite movements, that movement down into the ground that is the source of any other movement, it will gradually come into your normal movements. So that if somebody said to you, lift your arm up, but don't do anything with your leg, you would kind of stand there thinking, how do I do that? It's just not natural. And then part in the clouds. So what that means is as you reach up, and that can be quite a tricky movement, of course, as your hands go above your head, your feet are sinking down more. You've got a stronger connection to the ground, a stronger root to stabilize you. One more time. And shake your hand. I actually had that experience of having to figure out how to move just one part of my body when my martial arts teacher, sometimes he gets a bee in his bonnet and he does these conditioning exercises. And the place where we were training had these wooden benches, and we both got one either end, and he wanted us to lift the bench up like this. And I was doing this. I was, my knees were bending and I was pushing up, and he said, don't bend your knees. And I stopped. And he said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I just got to figure out how to do that without doing that, because it was like, so I had to really think about it. It was like, how do I do that? How do I move just one part of my body in that sense? It doesn't come naturally to me these days, which I'm quite pleased about, really. Okay, so now have one foot forwards. So again, don't rush. It's not a race or a competition. And give yourself a few moments over each leg. Sometimes I say to people, rest on the leg and take a breath. Take a full breath. You breathe in, you breathe out. Just let your weight settle. Then you go back. And again, you breathe in, you breathe out. Almost like you're breathing up through your leg and breathing out through your leg. And you can do this a few times. And then you realize that actually to move, once again, you're pushing your foot down into the ground. So you have to reaffirm that contact. After a while, you stop doing it with your breath, so that space, that moment of stillness actually becomes quite short. It doesn't have to be a long time, but it's not this anymore. There's just that stillness within the movement. Carry on, I'm just getting through. And it's in that sinking down, in that moment of stillness, that you begin to raise your toes and your heel. So this leads us in to the stepping. And then if you're comfortable with this, stepping in. And on the other side. So as soon as an exercise, go forwards, settle down, take a breath in and out, Imagine breathing up through the leg and out through the leg, if that helps. And then go back, rest there. And in that time, that's when you're sinking down. You can begin to feel the alignment of your body over the leg. Notice anything that is preventing that. Notice whether you're leaning out, or whether you're tight in your back, or whatever. It's not necessarily going to go away, but you should become aware of those factors. Gradually make it a smoother movement, so that it's a lot less time, but now that you know what you're trying to do, you'll find that you begin to do it more smoothly, more naturally. And then raising your toes and your heel. I always turn my front foot out slightly when I do this, because it opens the hip a bit more. I'm still going to be eventually get all my weight on that leg. Having the hip open as the back is already open actually helps the weight to settle. And then stepping in. First foot forwards again. Fisherman cast the net. So remember those movements in your chest and your back that we noticed when we did this in the chair. And rather than straining in your shoulders to try and put your arms in a particular position, use the combination of your weight moving forwards, the opening and closing in your back and chest, to just send your hands somewhere. Try not to have an idea that they've got to get to a certain point. Quite often with this exercise, people move their arms too much. So then if you're comfortable with this, you can go back to the toes and heel coming up and down. Maybe even, again, if you're comfortable with stepping. A little bit trickier with your arms moving, because there is always a tendency to overdo the movements of the upper body. So the stepping can expose those little kind of like changes in posture that we want to try and avoid. Of course, we don't want to fall, so okay. So on the other side, fisherman cast the net first of all. And again, you know, I'm doing it with both hands, but there's no reason why you shouldn't just do it like this, one hand forwards. And this can be quite good, because here, when we settle and the hand moves through, it's always a bit of trial and error here. So you might think, well, what happens if my hand goes there? And that might be the thing that pulls you forward. Well, you've got the chair there for support. So play around with this, and then just stepping in. I do sometimes try these exercises with the chair, and I'm trying them on my own, and it's quite interesting. I mean, it's not a question of whether you need to. It's more a question of whether using that for support actually enables you to learn more about what's going on in the exercise. And there's always more to learn. Good. And then bring your feet down. Good. Go back to your chairs. So as with the exercises, which always come back, if you like, to that centered position, or however you think about it. So the sessions that we work on together have this kind of rhythm about them, don't they? They start off with just that, that quietening, that stilling, and the movement builds, and then at the end, once again, we come back, and this is, this is why we always have Embrace Tiger, Return to the Mountain at the end. So just let your hands drop down. As you push your hands up, you may notice that even as a lot of your body is expanding again, we have that counter movement, that sinking of your hips and so on and so forth. So even as we expand out, we're sowing the seeds for the return, for that sense of coming back. In fact, it never leaves you. I've been describing it as a kind of, almost as a kind of either or. You're either expanding or contracting. But in fact, both of these things are going on all the time. And some of it is a matter of where we choose to put the focus of our attention. And then just rest, quite deliberately ending the session with this awareness of the stillness and the quietness. Just aware also of the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Sometimes you can even get a sense for kind of the blood circulating in your fingers and so on and so forth. Okay, and then just slowly open your eyes. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
I keep some of that doing this. It's not always easy, though.